Welcome to Holding the Line, a podcast about cops, courts, and crime. I'm Jason Johnson, LELDF president, joined by Sean Kennedy, LELDF's director of policy. Welcome back, Sean.
Glad to be here.
Another episode of Holding the Line.
Yeah, we're holding them.
Yeah, we're doing our best to. Anyway,
Trying.
so Sean, you interviewed Parker Thayer,
Yes,
an investigative journalist with the Capital Research Center. What did you guys talk about?
we talked about sort of the elephant in the room. In this case, maybe the donkey in the room. George Soros and his influence in politics, particularly obviously in criminal justice policy. We've done a lot of research on how his financing has affected prosecutors' races and other criminal justice causes. And Parker is one of the most thoughtful, but also one of the most competent researchers when it comes to looking at money in politics, particularly sort of the progressive left and what they've done in George Soros in particular. And we talked a great deal about what is at the root of the spending and how it works, sort of how the networks operate. And Parker gave us something really interesting, and he sort of put a number on how much he thinks George Soros has spent to date on criminal justice causes and the DAs.
What's the number? Are we going to wait until
we're going to have to find out?
Okay, all right. I'll have to wait and listen to Parker and see what he says.
So I hope you guys enjoy this episode with Parker Thayer of the Capital Research Center. Here you go. We're joined this week with Parker Thayer. Parker is an investigative reporter and researcher with the Capital Research Center, which honestly is one of the best outfits, not only in Washington, D.C., though I think Parker is actually based in the heartland of America, Michigan. But Parker does some of the yeoman's work. You have seen Parker's work, but you may have never seen his name. It's about dark money and left-wing activists, agitators, and how they get funded. Parker probably had his fingers in uncovering it, and he's one of the best Sherlock Holmes's forensic detectives out there doing this work. So we're so glad to have you on the podcast. Thank you for joining us, Parker.
Yeah, thanks for all of the praise you just gave me, and you guys deserve a lot of credit as well. On the Soros DAs, I always tell people you guys are the top experts in the world, period. Like there's no one who knows them better than you guys.
Well, I'll be honest. One of the things is Parker's the reason that we really got into it, because Parker started looking into some of the money, and we obviously have a deeper interest in the criminal justice component. Parker has his fingers in a lot of different pies, so he can't focus exclusively on that. He's going after the Green New Deal and all these other, anti-Israel groups and whatever else. He's trying to turn over so many rocks. He couldn't go as in depth as we could because we are so narrowly focused on crime and justice issues. But one of the players, and that's sort of the player that everyone knows out there, is George Soros, who I believe is 95, if not 96 years old now. And he is a billionaire, and he made his money in finance. Who is George Soros, and what is his role in both the sort of the nonprofit progressive movement, and what is his role in American society and culture, really?
Yeah. George Soros, the best way you can describe him is kind of the architect of the modern political left, and one of its biggest funders, obviously, as well. But, he's not just a guy who throws money away. He's a guy who throws money at areas that will be highly effective and that will change American politics dramatically. He is, we like to say that at Capital Research Center, we have a saying that the left has many Soroses. There are many, many people who are kind of have learned from what he did and have built empires to model his. But there will never be anyone exactly like George Soros. There are many Soroses, but there's only ever one real George Soros. He is kind of in a field of his own in terms of political maneuverings, especially as it concerns money.
He's the godfather of sort of the institutional political left, at least on the donor side. And he's made a lot of really smart strategic decisions. He gets that, he gets what is going to pay off and what's not, or where, a small investment is going to grow into a bigger thing. And one of the things, I think we'll come back to Soros in a minute, but you mentioned that there are lots of little Soroses. One of the things I think that the right gets wrong is to think that people like George Soros are dumb, or that they're making, they're just throwing huge money after problems. There are a lot of other people out there that are sort of both allied with him or working in tandem or in parallel, sometimes at odds, at least within the left. Who are the other people? Can you name a few of the other sort of mini Soroses out there that maybe people have never heard of, or at least they don't understand how big their influence is on the institutional and political left?
Yeah, Soros is like a model for billionaires now. He's become the archetype of the left wing billionaire. Um, you know, he's created by spending enormous amounts of money on district attorney elections. He's created like kind of like a breed, like a dog breed. There's a breed of DA. It's the Soros DA. He doesn't necessarily fund all of them because now being a soft on crime DA is now synonymous. He's done it so much; it's now synonymous with his name. But I mean, you've got plenty of billionaires. Both of the major Facebook founders, for example, you've got Dustin Moskovitz and Mark Zuckerberg. Both of them have spent millions and millions of dollars on soft on crime, policy reform and lobbying and et cetera, mostly through the nonprofits, while George is a little more focused on the PACs and, directly funding the candidates. He's inspired a whole bunch of other billionaires to kind of jump in and fund groups that are trying to give some amount of legitimacy to these soft on crime DAs that have just been an abject disaster. But there'll be a lot of university think tanks and a lot of, supposed experts on crime that will come out and say, oh, actually, the problem is caused by anything but the DAs. Usually is the explanation. It's just constant hand waving and meaningless explanations and oftentimes just straight up lies. So you got a lot of billionaires that are kind of building an entire infrastructure around what George Soros created.
Yeah, they're kind of in parallel or they're in support of, they're an echo chamber that reinforces what it is. So actually, let's focus down, just because obviously it's something that the Law Enforcement Legal Defense Fund has done a lot of research on. You can find our report, Justice for Sale from 2022, which identified the DAs that are Soros linked. And you made an important distinction there that there are DAs that took Soros money or directly had their campaigns funded through independent expenditures or PACs. And then there are Soros adjacent DAs, or sort of Soros light, where they didn't need Soros money to win, but they participate in Soros programming or other left-wing progressive groups that are funded by some of these billionaires that effectively are, building them up or giving them professional development, or some of them got to go on junkets to Portugal and Kenya, and I kid you not. But so explain to me what this ecosystem is. So there's the DAs themselves, and then there's people like George Soros. What is Soros' role in sort of the whole system? And then what are the other billionaires doing, and what organizations are they running and funding?
Yeah. So the way the whole Soros DA kind of ecosystem is kept alive nowadays, as with the rest of the left, the nonprofits are the tail that wags the dog. The candidates and the PACs and the political parties that you see, they certainly have a lot of money and they move around a lot of money, but the policy research, the advocacy work, a lot of sometimes even the get out the vote operations is being done by a very wide network of nonprofits that's popped up to kind of support the Soros DAs as they face very reasonable challenges from people whose cities have been destroyed by crime, and lots of recall efforts, and plenty of actual crimes committed by the DAs causing them to be removed from office. While all of this has been going on, the nonprofits have been what's keeping the Soros DAs and the machine surrounding them. That's what keeps the machine lubricated. That's what keeps it moving. It's the nonprofits that are almost just as big of a part of the Soros DA movement that has been going on since early 2016 at this point. So we've reached the 10-year anniversary of the Soros DAs. Those nonprofits, they're providing communication support. We've talked about the Wren Collective. We've talked about the Accountable Justice Action Fund. There's dark money groups involved in this. There are 501c3s that are doing the policy research. They're offering communications advice, communications consulting, a lot of the times just weighing in on what the DA should do in particular cases. So it is, the Soros DAs do not exist in a vacuum. They exist in a nonprofit ecosystem that's been funded by other billionaires and also George Soros. So it's even bigger than that.
Yeah, it's kind of like their donors are XYZ and George Soros. It's not George Soros and no one else. So sometimes I think people,
George Soros doesn't have to fund a DA directly to be influencing that DA, and his network especially influencing that DA. He's surrounded himself with all these nonprofits, and all these nonprofits have, policy experts at them who just go around all day long, and their job is to try and make the DA softer on crime while also trying to defend these horrible policies to the public.
And some of these organizations, these nonprofits, people don't realize also get taxpayer money. And one of those is the Vera Institute for Justice, which not only is a nonprofit, which I know Parker's the one who turned me on to the fact that they've gotten tons of federal and state and local monies, but they also have a C4, which is effectively a dark money political nonprofit, is what a C4 is. So tell me about Vera and what Vera's role is in the Soros DA ecosystem.
Yeah, so Vera Institute has been one of the biggest like I mentioned, all of these policy advocacy nonprofits. One of the biggest ones has been the Vera Institute for Justice. They've written all kinds of policy memorandums. They speak with these DAs often. They'll talk. Journalists will cite them as experts on crime. And basically, what the Vera Institute does is they get they used to get, at least, thank goodness, it is now a past tense, but they used to get an enormous portion, I think north of 80% of their revenue from federal grant and contracts. And basically, they were being paid by you, the taxpayer, to represent illegal immigrants, many of whom had committed heinous crimes in immigration proceedings. So they were being paid by you to make sure that you have to have criminal illegal aliens stay in your city. They can't be allowed to, or they can't be made to leave. You're not even allowed to make them leave, according to the Vera Institute. And so as they are getting all this federal money, they are also, of course, backing soft on crime DAs. They're propping them up with all kinds of policy and messaging support because, I think, largely because having soft on crime DAs helps them enormously when they're trying to prevent people from getting deported. And this was kind of the point of the original Soros DA movement, was to prevent these deportations.
And who brought the Vera Institute out of obscurity and gave it seed money 15 years ago? What's that name again?
Well, I mean, George Soros was involved in them quite early on, and then there were a wide number of other nonprofits, but George Soros was one of the biggest donors in their early days. So it's, it was, thank goodness, the Fear Institute no longer gets that insane amount of taxpayer cash. They're no longer, the Soros DAs aren't being funded by your dollars anymore.
Well, I mean, that may be the case. This is the one thing that I think people need to talk about. And I know, Parker, you work a lot on, obviously, federal stuff because we're looking at 990s, the IRS disclosure for nonprofits and campaign finance data, but you've done a lot of state work, is because of the way that true nonprofits or, social welfare organizations, C3s, 501c3s operate. Some of them operate very hyper locally, and they get passed through from larger national nonprofits or whatever. So a number of the local nonprofits in these local jurisdictions are themselves left-wing groups funded by these same billionaires.
Yeah, I mean, it's an operation at scale. There is national organizing hubs. There are national policy shops. There are local policy shops. There are local organizing hubs. There are, people on national, press tours, just constantly trying to, spread this idea of like America has a huge over-incarceration problem, and the only way to fix it is by basically just letting violent criminals go repeatedly over and over and over again and expect that there will be no consequences. So it's, they have it. This is a very sophisticated operation. That's the only way you could have gotten policies as disastrous as this in like every American city all at once.
Parker, I'm not going to hold you to it, but if you were to rough ballpark out over the last roughly 2 decades, how much money has been spent by the institutional left, George Soros included, but even broader than that, by this collection of mostly billionaires on criminal justice projects that we're talking about, these very radical criminal justice projects?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I mean, already starting off the bat with George Soros' direct contributions to district attorneys, we're already at 50, 60 million nowadays. Um, so, uh, after that, though, we start looking into, I mean, there have been lots of other large donations by other very wealthy donors to DAs. So we're probably talking well over 100 million total to prop up these DAs just directly to their campaigns. Once you get into the nonprofits, though, I mean, Mark Zuckerberg, Dustin Moskovitz, and George Soros each are probably good for at least 200 million each, probably more on what they've spent on the nonprofits backing either soft on crime or open borders advocacy as it relates to district attorneys and law enforcement policy in general. So we're probably looking nearly $1 billion, I would guess. Once it's all been said and done, I would say a safe estimate would be about $1 billion over the last 2 decades. There's a good chance it's higher.
And what's funny about that is when you say $1 billion, now the average presidential campaign costs $1 billion now, but they waste so much of that on TV. But if you think about the influence, the true real impact on people, the 60 to 70, roughly 100 Soros linked, they're not all Soros funded, but most of them are Soros funded linked DAs across the country, control at their high point over 25% of the population in the United States. The amount, and almost probably 50% of the crime, if you consider Philly and New York and LA and all that other stuff. That amount, that for $1 billion, you've had a decade of control of the largest cities in America. I mean, at least on the criminal justice front, that's pretty impressive as an investment. I mean, you spend $1 billion on a single presidential race and you lose. You spend $1 billion on a couple cycles for Congress and you still lose. He's winning, and has a decade of success across the country for cheap and really guiding their policies. Like we were talking about, it's not just the election. I mean, he's hand-holding them in office, and there's groups like the Wren Collective that obviously we've written a report about, and a lot of work you've done that shows their influence extends far beyond the day they're inaugurated.
What George Soros and his network did, and they've long been in favor of like total drug legalization. And they did this. They funded the ballot measures in Washington and in Oregon that have since just been, they legalized basically everything, and then they realized that was a disaster. So it started with drug legalization, and they wanted to transform criminal justice policy nationwide. And there are 2 ways to do this. The way that it is supposed to happen is through the legislative process, where the ordinary voters, through their representatives, and also through the ability to publicly comment on things, can have long discussions and debates about what our criminal justice system should look like. This is what was intended by the founders of our country and by the creators of democracies and republics entirely, was that the citizenry would be able to control what and influence what the policy of their town would look like, and they'd be able to have a say in that through their elected representatives. George Soros doesn't like that. That's too slow for George Soros. George Soros knows better than all of those silly people in all of their silly towns who have silly ideas that like the police should arrest criminals. Instead, George Soros realized that instead of trying to do all this legislative nonsense where you have to convince people and be right about things and know facts and be logically sound in your arguments, it's much easier to just replace the DA by spending more money than has ever been spent on any district attorney race in that city's history, all put together, in basically brute force a candidate in by tricking voters and having an entire PR operation to defend the insane policies that they're going to put in. So you've replaced what should be the will of the people, the legislative branch, with the executive, and you've rewritten the laws because now the DAs just don't enforce the laws that George Soros doesn't like. Now, by de facto, the laws have now been changed. The law is different. There are 2 systems of law in America. There's Soros law, and there's the law that is based on centuries of Western tradition. And you can pretty easily see which one is working. And I'm hoping that someday the Soros network might realize that all of those silly traditions that they thought they could just do away with, like all of the ways that policing has worked and the ways that prosecuting has worked. They did away with these things because they thought they were racist inventions of, colonizing, white men. And
Yeah.
then they found out that actually those things were pretty important.
Well,
Those things weren't invented for no reason. They weren't invented just to be cruel. The laws existed for a reason.
Well, I want to tell a quick story. I won't name the DA, but I was doing work and I was speaking to some of these DAs, including one who was a Soros linked or adjacent. And they're a very pleasant person that no personal animus towards this person at all. Was kindly not only took my call, but gave me a lot of their time. Obviously, they're not from a huge jurisdiction because they aren't that busy. But they were talking to me at length, and they told me that they got a call when they were running for reelection. They were up for reelection from the Soros people, Justice Safety PAC, which is run by Whitney Timus and some other people. And it was strange. It was out of the blue. Why are you calling me? And they said, well, we're interviewing all the candidates for the upcoming election for district attorney. And he said, there are no other candidates. I'm running unopposed. What are you talking about? Well, we're interviewing all the candidates that are running for district attorney. So I recommend you sit down with us. It was a threat. They were not happy with the DA's policies that were not radical enough. And they were making it clear to them that we are going to have a discussion or you will have a primary. And this has happened repeatedly. I've heard this from other DAs around the country that if I made more specific, they would be identifiable. But I've heard that there's a number of these people who are themselves the Soros DA, some of them Soros funded directly, who turned against Soros and not only got primaried, some of them beaten, but some of them have turned on Soros and because of the insanity of what they were asking them to do. And it was just crossing the lines. But I want to pivot to something more, I think, more fascinating, which is to the point of winning at these elections, is George Soros and all these other people, Mark Zuckerberg, Dustin Moskowitz, they're smart people. They did something really well. That's how they got rich. Alex Soros, not so much. Some of these other people, they didn't do anything. They inherited the money. Some of these are the wives or the kids of these billionaires. But the actual billionaires are smart people who achieve something, and that's why they have the luxury of blowing money on DA races or whatever else. So they're not dummies. Moskowitz, Zuckerberg, Bloomberg, Soros, all these guys are smart and they know what they're doing. And what they all know, and Soros is particularly because obviously he's the name behind Soros DAs, but he made his money in arbitrage. He made his money in risk analysis. What is going to get me the best investment? But something happened in the last few years. Not only has he lost some races, obviously Chesa Boudin was knocked out, and some other races where they just lost on a recall or on a straight up election where they did support the candidate, but they lost. George Soros has cut people off. Notably, and a lot of people didn't notice this, but it was pretty clear from the campaign finance filings right away that George Gascon, who got millions of dollars, I believe it was $2 million overall in his first race, got almost nothing the second time around and then went down in flames. He had no financial backing from Soros and even the institutional left. He got a little money from like some of the Van Jones groups and some other random stuff, but really everyone just cut him loose. And it was like randos writing $1,000 checks like a regular DA race. Like they just cut him loose. Why did Soros do that to Gascon? And what is his thinking process or the organization's thinking process about how they make these risk decisions or the arbitrage?
Yeah. I think there is definitely a change in how Soros is behaving and his network is behaving as they support these DAs on the nonprofit side and on the PAC side. I think they've realized, like, first of all, they're getting more secretive. Like in the early days of the Soros DAs, things were very open. That doesn't seem to be the case anymore. They're using a lot more dark money groups. They're using a lot of more pass-throughs. It's not usually clear who donors are to these DAs anymore. That's one thing that I've noticed. And so you can tell that they are becoming more averse to the reputational harm that the DAs are doing to George Soros and to his network.
At least the ones who are doing a bad job at it. Because I could point out here where I live in Fairfax County, adjacent is Arlington County.
Yeah.
Steve Descano in Fairfax County was funded by a great deal of money from George Soros. and he is making a muck of it. Now, he did win re-election in 2023, but he's up again. But he's making a muck of it. Every day is another bad story about some screw up, incompetent, whatever. He's not very articulate or whatever. In nearby Arlington, another DA won in the same year, also funded by Soros, also got a stiff primary challenge in 2023 and won. Parissa Dagani Tafti, but she does not embarrass him.
Yeah.
I feel like there is a little bit of are you making me look bad? I want you to be doing well and doing all these things that I want, as you were saying, decarceration and anti-police stuff, but don't do it so sloppily that I look bad.
No, that's absolutely right. I don't think the Soros network has changed its mind on the disastrous policies, even though thousands and thousands of people are now dead because of them. But they have, the shame, the public embarrassment does seem to be moving the needle for them a little bit.
You had mentioned earlier how he uses elaborate pass-throughs or does all these sort of different organizations changing the names of things or whatever. In New York City, in 2021, Alvin Bragg is running. He's the assistant attorney general or deputy attorney general for the state, and he's running for Manhattan DA, New York County DA. And he is the progressive choice. And so Color of Change PAC, which is run by Van Jones, pledges $1 million to Alvin Bragg's campaign as a independent expenditure. Within days of that pledge, Color of Change gets a check for exactly $1 million in the name of George Soros. Then a scandal breaks after Color of Change has spent $500,000 on mail and TV and all these other things in that Manhattan DA race. And the scandal is roughly that Alvin Bragg was sexually harassing women. And they thought it was going to be a bigger deal than it was, is what I think the impression was, that he may go down in the primary or whatever. So Color of Change announces publicly that they're not going to back Bragg anymore. And so then what happens? Within weeks, Color of Change sends a refund for $500,000 to George Soros. And then a woman at the New York Times has the gumption and the complete lack of common sense to say, there's no proof that George Soros funded Alvin Bragg's campaign. One, what are you talking about? Like $1 million comes in and then they get a refund when they stop spending. Like, it's clearly his money. He wanted it back. But to the point about these outside groups, this is sort of in microcosm. A woman murdered her husband in Manhattan, either the year before or the year of the election. And when she committed that murder, there was some push because it was somehow justified spousal abuse, and there's a race component because the husband was white and the perpetrator's black, a black woman, or whatever. Color of Change agitated that he dropped the charges. Bragg dropped the charges. And Bragg's like, no, I'm not going to drop the charge. What are you talking about? And they kept banging the table, and then he dropped the charges. And it's like they explicitly said to Alvin Bragg, both privately and publicly, we want you to drop the charges. We want you to drop the charges. We're your number one donor. We want you to drop the charges. And this plays out over the country, sometimes more noticeably than others, where they are exerting direct inside or outside pressure on these DAs to get specific case outcomes.
Yeah, no, it is. We're moving towards mob rule, and maybe not necessarily mob rule because the mob is very small and it's controlled by just a couple guys with a whole lot of money. So it's maybe even closer to oligarchy than it is to mob rule. But you've got these groups, like another group, you mentioned Color of Change, another group that's doing a lot of work to back these very far left DAs nowadays is the Working Families Party, which is funded by a enormous number of pass-through networks that are all funded by Soros to some extent or one another. And I think also potentially by Soros himself, though I'm not positive about that.
The Democracy PAC just put $3.5 million in the last quarter. And before that, they put a couple million in earlier. They're putting money directly in. And then Working Families Party just spent $1.2 million. He put in 1.5, and then Working Families put 1.2 million into a DA candidate in Baltimore County, Maryland, outside of Baltimore City, who won, defeated the tough on crime Democrat incumbent. Her name is Sarah David. And now they have a new Soros DA in Baltimore County. And they use the Working Families Party to do it.
Yeah, so it's like we mentioned earlier, Soros is going more underground with this. The Soros DA brand is so toxic that it's not really worth it to him to do all of this publicly, and so there's a lot more use of pass-throughs like Color of Change and the Working Families Party. So this isn't going anywhere. The Soros DAs aren't going anywhere. They seem to be sticking around. They're getting more creative. They're going underground. The funding channels are being obscured, but the movement, even though it's kind of on the back foot with all of the recalls and many of the Soros DAs just going to prison or being removed from office because of crimes they've committed, it's not, they're down, but they're not out yet.
Parker, I want to thank you for joining us this week and your insight in this. And again, go to Capital Research Center's website, find out what Parker's working on. It's not just the criminal justice space, but there's so many things. They have a great website called influencewatch.org, and it's basically a Wikipedia for the institutional left. They put the primary resource documents right there. They walk you through it. And Parker is the workhorse behind much of that. And so again, thank you, Parker, for joining us. And until next time.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Holding the Line. We were so glad to have been joined by Parker Thayer, and you can follow Parker and Capital Research Center on X/Twitter at Parker Thayer, at Parker Thayer, and Capital Research Center at Capital with an A Research on X. And I really encourage you all to go to influencewatch.org to sort of find the Wikipedia of the institutional nonprofit left and their financing. It's a really good resource for anyone out there who's interested in how this stuff works and who these people are. So thank you again for listening, and follow us on Spotify or anywhere. Give us a 5-star review and tune into the next episode of Holding the Line, a podcast about cops, courts, and crime.